Hey, and welcome back to Workshop Wednesday. I'm Chelsea Bussenmeyer. Thanks for joining me today in my workshop. Today, we're going to make a pencil case. So it's going to have a zipper closure, and I'm going to also show you how you can do a 3D bottom. I did mine a little bit longer, as you can see here, because I'm actually not using it for pencils. I'm using it for these little game pieces from a game we have. You've got to pull them out during the game, and it came with this box. And it doesn't fit actually in the game box. I made this little pouch so I can put all those pieces in there and it fits in the box to put it away. But of course you could use this bag for anything. Makeup brushes, I like the little 3D popped bottom for something like that. And yeah, you just have to pick the right length zipper. And if you've never done a zipper, this is a really great starter zipper. If you've already done zippers, this will be super easy for you. So let's get to it. What you're going to need is some fabric and a zipper. So because I'm making my little pouch for these little squares instead of an actual pencil case or pen case, I'm going to use this 6-inch zipper. Now, if you are making it for, pens, pencils, or maybe even your paintbrushes, make sure you have a zipper that's a little bit longer than what you want to put in it. So this pen, if I measure it, it's about 6.5. So I would say you're going to want to do at least a 7-inch zipper, maybe give yourself a little extra room, do an 8-inch zipper. As long as it's longer than what you want to put in it, you'll be good. There's nothing more annoying than if the opening is too small for whatever you want to kind of store in your pouch. Now for the fabric here, I'm going to use this denim. This is actually an upcycled piece of denim. This was the bottom piece of a pair of jeans that I cut off for shorts. And I've got both legs here, right sides together. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to square this off. Now I'm using denim because I just like the look of it and it's nice and sturdy. So you'll definitely want to use something that has enough body to it. And I'm just squaring this off because these jeans, they had a flare to them. So I can tell that the grain line is straight up and down, but my edge here isn't straight, and I want to have a nice right angled pouch. So I'm just going to find my edge to work off of. And there we go. Okay, so next we got to decide how big the pouch is going to be. So I'm going to make my pouch just slightly longer than my zipper. I'm going to have a 1/4 inch space at each end of my zipper. So since this is a 6-inch zipper, I want the finished pouch to be 6.5 total. And then I also need to calculate for my seam allowances. So I'm just going to do 3/8 for my seam allowance. So I'll have that on both ends as well. So that's an extra 3/4 of an inch. So my total width for my pouch is going to be the 6 inches for the zipper plus the buffer, so that's 6.5, plus the 3/4 for both of my seam allowances, so 7.25. So I'm just gonna start. I love this grid rulers. It doesn't really matter if it's a triangle or a square, but that way I can line it up with my nice square edge here, or straight edge here rather, in my grain line, and mark this on. And then the other thing we need to decide is how deep do we want this pouch to be. So you can make it as deep as you like. For me, I think I'm gonna go, maybe like a 6-inch depth. Yeah. So once again, we have our full pouch depth, whatever you want that to be, and then your seam allowance. So depending on how you want to finish your zipper, you may need a little extra seam allowance for your zipper. If you want to do a zipper with flaps, you may need up to, 1 inch of seam allowance. For me, I'm just going to do, I want my zipper to be exposed. So I'm just going to keep that 3/8 of an inch of seam allowance on the inside. So I'll have the seam allowance at my zipper end and at the bottom. So 3/8 plus 3/8 is, once again, 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go down here to 6 3/4. just gonna mark this on here. Of course, you can make yourself a pattern if you'd like. I'm just marking it straight on the fabric because I probably won't ever make it again. And if so, I can just easily mark it out once again. So I just did 2 spots here so that if I'm lined up with both of them, I know this is going to be a straight square edge. I can put one of my lines from my grid ruler on my side as well, just to make sure that everything is in a nice right angle. And then we're going to measure our width once again. We said 7 1/4. It's here. 7 1/4. It's here. And I got my 2 reference locations. If you don't mark out your fabric square with nice right angles, then it's going to make things trickier to piece this together. Okay, let's get this cut. Perfecto. So first we're going to apply both of these pieces to our zipper, just because it's easier to get at the zipper when they're still separate, and it'll make the installation go a little easier. So I was trying to decide if I should just have my seam allowance on the inside of the pouch and then just have the fabric folded over on either side of my zipper, or if I want to top stitch it. I think I'm going to top stitch it just because it will give us a nice sharp edge, and top stitching looks pretty cute, especially on denim. I almost want to do a contrasting stitch, but we'll see when we get to that. Before we actually install this zipper, let's look at a couple of different feet. It's really nice to have some extra feet when you are working with zippers. You don't necessarily have to have them, but it does make it easier in a lot of scenarios, just because your zipper is really thick here where the teeth are. And if you have a regular foot like the one I have on, but you want to sew closer to the zipper than just like the width of your foot, from where it makes the stitching to the edge of the zipper, then you have to have your pressure foot on top of the zipper. And because it's so thick, it's most likely not going to be putting any pressure on the zipper itself or the fabric. So your transportation can really be off, and it can slide around, especially if you have to like open up your zipper to stitch it together. So it's really nice to have a variety of zipper feet. So I have some here just to show you. This one here is a narrow foot, so it still stitches right in the center, but you can see because it's so narrow, I can get much closer to the zipper. This one here has the stitch hole offset, so I can actually stitch like directly next to the teeth if I run the zipper on this side. You can use this type of zipper foot for stitching an invisible zipper or anything else that's really thick, like if it has some trim or beading and you want to stitch really close to something that's thick, but you want to maintain that pressure on what you're sewing so that the feed dogs can catch it and feed it through. Yeah, the transportation just can get really off. These two here are invisible zipper foot, so if you want to learn how to do an invisible zipper, check out my tutorial on invisible zippers. And the teeth for the zippers will just run through these grooves, so that's why they have the grooves in these feet. I'm going to use a narrow foot today, so I'm going to use my favorite one, just the regular old narrow foot, so that I can get close to the teeth. What I want to do here is I want to sew actually kind of in the middle of the fabric, because I want to show off some of this pink fabric, but I don't want it to be too close to the edge. So that's why I'm going to use this one, so I can get a little bit closer to those teeth than my regular foot would allow me to do, and I can still maintain that good connection between the pressure foot and the feed dogs for transporting my piece here. So I'm just going to take this foot out, replace it with this one here. You can see here too, I've already decided on my contrasting thread for my top stitching. So I put a yellow thread in the needle and I just have my dark blue in the bottom. So let's get this zipper installed. You can see here that I've just serged the edge just to keep it nice and clean. If you have a serger, go ahead and serge it. If not, you can cut your fabric with a pinking shear or zigzag stitch it, or just leave it raw. It just might fray a little bit. And I've also put a little marking here where the edge of my zipper should be, so the teeth, the edge should be. So this space above is my 3/8 seam allowance plus my 1/4 inch buffer. And I've got that marked on both sides. So I'm going to stitch it from this side because I can easily see where I'm stitching on my zipper fabric here. And I know I want to stitch kind of halfway through the zipper. If I was to measure it, I'm just going to start over here. This fabric is about 3/8 of an inch as well. So I want to have a little bit of fabric overhang. If I want that fabric to have a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, I want to sew just on the other side of my serge stitching. And if I want to sew halfway in the zipper, I need to have just a little bit of fabric hanging out. So I know where my placement is at the top, and I know where my placement is here along the side. And I also know I want to stitch down the center of this fabric. So I'm just going to go all the way from the end, back stitch, there we go. It's as easy as that. If we flip it over, we can kind of take a look at our work, and you may have noticed too, I haven't basted this or had any pins at all. It works really easily with the structure of the fabric of the zipper. It's a cotton based zipper, and then I also have the denim fabric, which has nice structure to it. So nothing's really moving on me, and I'm also pretty experienced at installing zippers, so I don't need to bother with pins and basting anymore. You can of course baste it if you like to put it in place or add some pins. And then when we flip it over, we can see here too, this is our nice pink zipper and the edge of our fabric. So what we can do now is, because this fabric lays so nice and flat, I can just go ahead and top stitch it. If you want, you could iron it or press it in between just to make sure you have a nice sharp edge. But I'm just going to go ahead and top stitch it right close to the edge with my contrasting thread. There we go. If I had wanted to do a flap, I could have left it overhang a little bit more over top of the zippers and then top stitch it, but I don't want to do a flap on the zipper. I want to have that zipper and those nice little metal teeth exposed and the contrasting pink exposed as well. For the second side, I promised you a second method, and this one is just as easy. There's kind of pros and cons to both methods. Here for this side, I've already pressed the seam allowance over. If you were doing a flap, you would have once again pressed the entire seam allowance over. It would have just been wider because you would need that extra seam allowance for your flap. So it would look something like that, covering up the zipper. That would be like a one-sided flap. If you had a flap that just went to the center of the teeth, then that you could do a flap on both sides. But for this one, I'm just going to fold it over with my 3/8 of an inch where I pressed it previously. I would recommend pressing it here just because it is a lot happening, and if you don't have it pre-pressed and you don't see the edge underneath, if you're stitching from the top, then it's easy for your seam allowance to get wonky. So I'm just gonna place it here where I want it to run along my zipper. Since I am doing the second side already, I can gauge on my first side. And I do have a little bit of a marking here, but I can also line up my edges this way. So the pros of stitching it with this method is I only have to stitch over it once. The drawback is with this side, I've really attached the edge really closely and tightly to my zipper. So you'll see here that the edge might stand up a little bit more on this side because it's not stitched twice. And the other drawback is because it is only stitched once, it's not as sturdy technically, so it could kind of come apart. So this one, it's like as soon as I start to pull on it, it pulls on the zipper. Like I can see that this folded edge is really nice and tight. On the second side here, it kind of folds up a little bit. So if you're doing a flap zipper, it doesn't matter because you do want the flaps to fold up and come open. When I'm doing it with it exposed and I want that edge to be nice and close to what I'm sewing, it does have kind of that drawback that it comes apart a little bit more here than the side that is stitched twice. So just depends on how much tug and pull. If this is going to get a lot of strain to it, then I definitely would recommend the double stitching. But for this little baggie, the single stitching is totally fine as well. So there you go. There is your zipper already installed. Open it up. So now that we've got this adorable contrasting zipper already installed, we're just going to fold our right sides together and stitch around the outside edge. So I'm going to stitch through the zipper first, stitching those ends together so the zipper will be kind of part of our side seam. Back stitch nice and tight along both the zipper and this top portion, just because there is quite a bit of strain, especially on the side with the opening. And then we're just going to go all the way around. If you're going to leave your bag square, then I would recommend doing one stitch kind of at a right angle. I always like to back stitch that stitch and continue along. Doing one stitch at a right angle just kind of helps the corner. It helps turn the corner nicely. So if you have your corner stitched right into the corner, it just doesn't turn around quite as nice and square. It seems a little counterintuitive, but it is better for your corners that way. And once again, I'm just gonna back stitch a little extra here, just because of the strain that it will experience here at this top corner. So because I'm serging my edges, I just quickly went ahead and stitched all the way around to finish that off. And then what we want to do is just flip our little baggie around. So if you're leaving it flat, you are now finished. I'll just take a quick little look at this. I like to kind of fold my seam allowance if I'm not cutting it out of the corner. I like to kind of fold it over one side and up so that it's folded already square. Kind of see that it's folded over and then up. So I have a nice little square, and that kind of helps also pop that corner out nice and square. And then your seam allowance isn't all bunched in and rounded like this side. It's not really wanting to turn nicely. So I'm just gonna fold this over. It really doesn't matter which side is first, just so that you have a nice square corner. And then that seam allowance kind of pops it out. Of course, you can get creative, put patches on before you close up the side seams. You can stitch around the edge, put in some trim. I like to put like strips of ribbon, just like stitched on it before I close pencil cases. Anything really. And then close this up on the top. You can see our nice zipper installation. So what you really want to be careful of when you're installing your zippers is you want that zipper to be one-to-one with the fabric. You don't want the fabric to be stretched or the zipper to be stretched. That's when you will get those wavy, bubbly zippers. So to do the 3D bottom, I'm just going to line up my side seam with the bottom seam, and I'm going to just put the seam allowance from the bottom to the left, the top one, or the side seam to the right, just so that I'm dividing kind of the bulk and it doesn't get too thick. And you want those seams to be right lined up, because when they are really lined up, you'll have this right angled corner. And I'm just going to take my ruler and line up just one line right straight along my stitching and decide how much I'm just going to kind of sew over the corner. I'm just going to do kind of maybe 1.5 inches in total, so like 3/4 of an inch on either side. I'm just gonna put a marking here and then just stitch right straight along that marking. You want to be really sure that your seam allowance or your seams, your stitch lines line up and that you have the same amount on either side. Otherwise, it won't end up square. So I'm going to do the seam allowance in the same direction along the bottom so that it's nice and flat here. And then lay the side seam to the opposite direction. Line them up once again. And then do the same amount here. So whatever you did on the first side, just make sure you do the same amount on the second side. Here we go. So let's see what this looks like. So pop these corners out. There's not a lot of seam allowance in there, so it's easy to pop them out. You can see the bottom of our little bag. Look at this cute little bag. Like this with a 3D bottom, it's almost more of like a little makeup bag. Of course, you could even put a handle on it, turn it into a purse. Super fun little piece. And I think it will be great for these little squares with the little 3D bottom. So that's going to be awesome. Well, thanks for joining me for this fun little zipper pouch project. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you would like to learn how to install zippers, how to avoid the pitfalls, and really master zippers, then don't miss out on my Zipper Masterclass. It's happening this Saturday. There will be a link below in the description box where you can register for that class, and if the class is already passed, then I'll get a link below as quick as possible where you can get yourself a copy of the recording of that class so that you don't miss out on all of the tips that we cover. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Workshop Wednesday. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next week, take care and happy sewing.